Thank you to Jess for that introduction. Your values, your passion, your commitment to this city shine through everything that you do. And I know that Jess will be a brilliant MP for Birmingham, for the Birmingham Yardley constituency after the general election. And thank you to all of you for coming along today, to my friend and colleague Shabana Mahmood's constituency here in Ladywood. Just 21 days until the general election day, polling day, what is set to be the closest, the most important general election in my lifetime. All the party manifestos have now been published. There's now a clear choice for the British people in 3 weeks' time, a choice between Labour's better plan for working people or a plan from the Tories which is failing working people, a choice between Labour's concrete and fully funded pledges or fantasy and unbelievable promises from the Conservative Party. And today, I'm going to set out that Labour's better plan can and will be delivered, and that we can show exactly where the money will come from. I'm going to set out how, in marked contrast, the Conservative Party's manifesto contains billions of pounds of panicky promises with absolutely no idea where the money's coming from. And I'm going to explain how working people will end up paying the price for that Tory plan, because they've made £25 billion of unfunded promises, and that would work out £1,400 for every working household in our country. We published our manifesto on Monday, and as Ed Miliband said, it starts with a clear commitment on the first page. It says every policy in this manifesto is paid for. Not one commitment requires additional borrowing. 3 days on, that Labour commitment remains unchallenged even by the Conservative Party, because for every one of our manifesto promises, we've said exactly where the money will come from. So on childcare, we've said 25 hours of free childcare for working parents of 3 and 4-year-olds to make work pay and help families balance work and family life, fully paid for by raising the bank levy by £800 million. We've said tax cuts for millions of working people on middle and lower incomes through a 10p starting rate of income tax, which will help over 2 million people here in the West Midlands, fully paid for by scrapping the unfair Conservative marriage tax allowance, which won't help most married couples, let alone most families with children. We've said business rates cut for 1.5 million small business properties, including 41,000 here in Birmingham, over 170,000 in the West Midlands, fully paid for by not going ahead with a further cut in corporation tax. A paid starter job for every young person out of work for 12 months or more, which they'll have to take, fully paid for by a one-off tax on bank bonuses. Backing the next generation by cutting tuition fees to £6,000 and increasing maintenance grants, fully paid for by restricting pension tax relief for the highest earners and clamping down on tax avoidance. A one-year rail fares freeze, fully paid for by delaying road projects on the A27 and A358 where the economic case has not been made. 1,000 extra border guards, fully paid for by a small charge on non-visa visitors to the UK. And we will tackle disguised employment, scrap the Shares for Rights scheme so that we can abolish the unfair and hated bedroom tax, our promise, again, fully funded. And on the NHS, 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more GPs, cancer tests guaranteed in a week, a plan to save and transform our NHS, fully paid for by a mansion tax on properties over £2 million, a levy on the tobacco companies, and closing tax loopholes. We, Labour, are the only party with a fully funded plan to get extra investment into the NHS, an extra £2.5 billion a year, and we will start to implement that in our first budget. Every policy fully costed, fully funded, fully paid for, with no additional borrowing. Concrete promises we can deliver and which we will deliver. And what a contrast to the Conservatives and their manifesto this week. The Tories already have plans for extreme cuts to to public spending because they want to go beyond simply balancing the books in the next Parliament. Their plans mean deeper spending cuts in the next 3 years than we've seen in the last 5 years. It means doubling the pace of spending cuts next year compared to this year. And those numbers already include the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility's forecasts for economic growth under their plans. As the OBR said, George Osborne's budget plans will mean a sharp acceleration in cuts to public spending. Risky and extreme plans. But since the budget, the Tories have now made billions of pounds of panicky pre-election promises with absolutely no idea where the money's coming from. So today, we are publishing an audit of the commitments made in the Conservative Party manifesto. Our audit is based on costings from the independent experts at the House of Commons Library, Treasury figures, and figures produced by the Conservative Party themselves. It clearly shows that Tories have made billions of pounds of commitments with no idea how to pay for them. 8 billion in 2020 for the NHS. But the Tories haven't said where the money's coming from. As Ed Miliband said, you can't finance the NHS on an IOU. A 5-year freeze in rail fares, which the Transport Secretary admitted would cost £1.8 billion, £360 million a year. The Tories haven't said where the money's coming from at all for that pledge. 3 days a week of paid leave, volunteering. We've made, on a cautious basis, an assumption there would be 50% take-up in the public sector. It would cost £1.2 billion a year. The Tories haven't said anything about where the money will come from for that £1.2 billion plan. A rise in the personal allowance to £12,500. We've taken the cautious assumption they won't actually introduce that until the last full year of the Parliament. If they do, it would cost £6.5 billion a year. The Tories haven't said anything about where the money will come from for that promise either. A rise, they say, in the higher rate threshold to £50,000. On the same basis, that would be £3.9 billion a year. Again, the Tories have said nothing about where the money will come from to pay for that promise. A housing policy, which would cost £4.5 billion a year. The experts say it could cost a lot more than that. The Tories have said they can find £100 million to pay for that £4.5 billion plan. And on childcare, a policy which is costed at £1 billion a year. But again, the Tories have only identified £350 million of funding to pay for that plan. It all adds up, as is set out in detail in this assessment, to £25 billion of promises from the Conservative Party, which they have not explained how they'll pay for. So with 3 weeks to go until polling day, I say it's time for the Tories to come clean. It's time for the Tories to come clean and tell the British people, where is the money coming from? How will you pay for your panicky promises, and who will end up footing the bill? The Tories think they can get away with ducking these questions. I've got to say, it's no wonder David Cameron doesn't want to go and do the debate tonight, and why he's been ducking head-to-head debates with Ed Miliband for weeks and months. But they can't brush these questions under the carpet. It's too important, and the sums are so huge. David Cameron, before the last election, said, and I'll quote him, "No policies will be adopted until they've been fully costed," he said. He said, "The British people aren't fools. If you pretend as a politician," he said, "that you can wave some tax cuts at them and not tell them how they're going to be funded, they just won't believe you." He was right. On the same day, George Osborne said, if you could not explain how a tax cut was going to be paid for, he said it was a complete tax con, and all of us will end up paying higher taxes later. Even as recently as January, David Cameron was saying the real risk of the NHS is the risk of unfunded spending commitments which bring chaos to our economy. And just listen to what George Osborne said 3 months ago. He said, Spending commitments are superficially attractive. They get ready applause from lobby groups. They get you headlines. But unfunded spending commitments, George Osborne said, are made with borrowed money, and the price is paid by future taxpayers. Add all the spending commitments up, he said, and you get an unaffordable bill for Britain that threatens our economy. That is exactly what he is doing now. So I say to David Cameron and George Osborne, who is going to pay for this £25 billion of promises, which you can't say at the moment how you're going to pay for? David Cameron and George Osborne say, look at our track record. But we know their track record shows it's not those with the broader shoulders who make the contribution. Just look at how they gave a huge tax cut to millionaires while they've opposed our mansion tax on properties over £2 million. They've refused to repeat the bank bonus tax. Just look at how they've asked working people to pay more by raising VAT and cutting tax credits, which according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies means £1,100 a year more for every household. Everyone knows, in the end, it will be working people who will end up paying the price for these Tory commitments. The Tories have racked up £25 billion a year in promises. They can't explain how they will pay for them. £25 billion is the equivalent of £1,439 a year for every working household in Britain. That's the price working people will pay for if the Tories get back in, the price working people will pay for the Tories' panicky and unfunded promises where they're not saying where the money will come from. And you know, it does not have to be like this. 2 years ago, I said the Office for Budget Responsibility should be allowed independently to audit the manifesto spending and tax commitments of the main parties. The OBR should be doing this kind of independent audit for every political party. It's a move which I believe would have helped improve trust in politics and the quality of debate in this election. We challenged George Osborne time and time again to back this move and allow the independent OBR to play this vital role. He repeatedly blocked that reform, and now we know why. George Osborne did not want the independent OBR to confirm that every pledge in Labour's manifesto is costed and paid for and requires no additional borrowing. And he didn't want the Tory manifesto subject to independent scrutiny from the OBR, because we know what it would have found. And we know too why none of these promises in the last few weeks were included in George Osborne's budget back in March. Because if he had included them there, they would have had to have been scrutinised by the independent OBR, who would have shown George Osborne's sums don't add up and he's not got the money to pay for these promises. So Labour will make sure in future this can't happen again. We will legislate not only to allow the independent OBR to independently audit the manifesto spending and tax commitments of parties which choose that audit, we will legislate to require the OBR to do it for all the main parties. And today I call on all the other main